Certainly, I recognize that to pursue inclusion is the practice of educating individuals with and without disabilities together without any regard for individuality is often more harmful in some ways, especially when considering behavioral modification. Earlier tendencies were to keep individuals with disabilities segregated from their peers. Yet, I am also convinced that with the implementation of Universal Design for Learning, most individuals' education in the regular permit would have been appropriate and their chances of success much greater. In fact, Universal Design for Learning not only has the potential to radically transform the meaning of inclusive education, but the very concept of disability. In 1975, Congress passed a law, although renewed several times since, that became known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA was enacted to ensure that individuals with disabilities receive equivalent and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment, usually the regular classroom. And since then, conflicting conversations initiated regarding the benefits of inclusive education, and not just for children with disabilities, but also for adults in higher education, their peers, and instructors who were proponents of inclusion. They stressed the value of all learners and their right to be included, regardless of their individual differences and abilities. Critics of inclusion, however, argue that certain individuals with disabilities can only learn through non-traditional teaching methods, and if they require more individualized instruction, it would stem from only certified special educators, usually in special education settings. But by far the most permeating criticism of inclusion emphasizes the negative impact on so-called non-disabled students. For example, a 2012 study published by a leading higher education journal expressed concern for regular education or regular students whose classrooms, they claimed, are being overly adapted to meet the needs of others. And they questioned the fairness of allocating funds to provide resources to a small, approximate 12% of the population. This study reflects the widespread assumption that the regular classroom is rightly the province of non-disabled students and is some sort of neutral, value-free space that students with disabilities raid and interrupt with their very existence and their expensive requirements for modifications and adaptations. What this view failed to recognize is that this space is far from neutral and is actually constructed according to the cynical, mythological, able-bodied, neurotypical standard that neither represents nor accommodates the wide range of diverse learners within higher education. Regardless of whether these learners have been diagnosed with a disability, and judging from the disproportionate placement of culturally and linguistically diverse and minority male students in disability categories, it's also a space that's made some pretty broad assumptions based on dominant discourses of gender, race, culture, and class. Another troubling aspect of how inclusion was reflected in the study was their failure to recognize that the so-called non-disabled students actually benefited from the supports and accommodations designed for students with disabilities. In fact, by making a distinction between the regularly taught students and the others, this study draws rigid but fast division between those considered able-bodied, or the norm, and those considered disabled, or that is, anything that deviates from the norm. Our built environments, policies, even our attitudes make for very little room for human variation. Consequently, our current social model displays privileged bodies and minds as only being fit capable of intelligence and even beauty. Therefore, any bodies and minds that do not move, look, act, or think in ways according to these norms are automatically rendered disabled. Disability scholars attempt to challenge and dismantle these sorts of discourses by reimagining disability as a wide-ranging continuum that encompasses all beauties, bodies, and minds. Moreover, through a new social medical model, we are advocating to view disability not as some type of individual problem or affliction needing cure as previously implied in the old medical model of disability. Therefore, the goal is not to try to adapt diverse bodies and minds to rigid existing structures, but to radically reimagine these structures to make them fit diverse bodies and minds. The social model of disability also recognizes the dependency of all individuals on external supports, technologies, and interventions just to survive and flourish, or simply to make life easier. For example, so-called non-disabled individuals commonly rely on items such as eyeglasses, computers, and ladders, even warm clothing on a cold day, and no one thinks twice about these uses. It's supports used by so-called disabled individuals for things such as interpreters, wheelchairs, service animals, and psychotropic drugs that these individuals are considered needing accommodations that are expensive, unnecessary, or even burdensome. Universal Design for Learning is the best example of the application of the social model of disability to educational approaches. It's based on neuroscientific evidence that individuals vary widely in their backgrounds, abilities, motivations, and have different learning needs and styles. Universal Design for Learning means creation and implementation of teaching materials and methods that reduce barriers in the learning process and that make learning accessible for all students. This is accomplished through the 3 UDL guidelines. The first UDL principle is to offer students multiple methods of representation of course information through various formats, not just text, but digital formats such as audiobooks, charts, graphs, pictures, and music materials that connect students' backgrounds and languages and their experiences. The second UDL principle is to offer students multiple means for expressing what they know, not just written expression, but verbal expression through performance. The creation of artistic works, for example, through a website design or film production. And the third UDL principle is to offer students multiple means of engagement, from motivating them to learn things such as collaborative work or group projects through role play or game services. Learning how to connect knowledge from inside of the classroom to life on the outside. So unlike traditional methods that attempt to adapt diverse learners to typically inflexible curricula and materials, Universal Design for Learning proactively creates these materials at the onset to make them adapt to the needs of diverse learners. That social model recognizes the unfairness, even the futility of using one approach, one set of materials, one form of assessment that tend to privilege one type of learner. As a quotation attributed to the conscious Einstein, even though we don't know for sure, however, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its entire life believing that it's stupid. My journey has exposed me to the often frustrating facets of inclusive education and has generated my outrage over how little our educational institutions truly accommodate the needs of diverse learners. Nevertheless, it has also forced me to recognize the limitations of my own instructional approaches. I have long prided myself as a disability advocate and ally, but it never really occurred to me that my view of accommodation was in many ways inherently flawed. Originally, I was taught that accommodations were something from which only students with disabilities were to benefit from. As a new faculty member, I only offered accommodations on a case-by-case basis, always after the fact, never built into the curriculum from the start. And worst of all, I made a lot of ableist assumptions about my students' abilities to see, hear, think, understand, organize, and even attend class.
The software stuff was pretty hard for me because I was not into computers before I went blind, and that's really important because almost everything I do is done on the computer.
Plaintiff 3 was acted with negligence if the plaintiff was a private. Blank. 978S.W.2D.
Professors will refer to slides on the board or write on the board and refer to what they've written, and I'm going, I have no idea what's going on. And that's kind of an awkward thing to say in a class full of like 100 people. Blindness puts you in awkward positions sometimes.
And as I began to redesign my courses using UDL principles, in which I am very much still involved with today, I began to recognize the incredible possibilities of applying UDL not only at the lower educational level, but also on the higher graduate education and doctorate level. UDL principles and guidelines also provide the prospect to connect future educators to the technological systems, curricular resources, and instructional practices that make learning accessible for everyone. Ultimately, Universal Design for Learning locates value in productions of knowledge that have been traditionally ignored or marginalized, even denigrated. We must also understand that some individuals create knowledge from outside of the margins. This method of understanding allows them to form new meaning regarding the world around them. Unfortunately, this view has been known as disruptive and challenging of the master narratives. In the same way, Universal Design for Learning gives students, faculty, and institutions the power to form new discourses that radically transform existing ideologies, that create new multiple understandings of the correct way to see, hear, think, and know. Thank you for listening.